Okay. Good good uh good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to go into some depth. Sorry to bother you. I just want to explain something. So, I need to tell you a little story. Okay. So, I don't know if you could read it, but okay, I'm going to just get into some depth. It says another 2,000 weeks doing Instacart faster. Alright, another 2,000 weeks. Another 2,000 weeks of Instacart faster. Okay, so this is what I'm going to just explain. It says Instacart challenge. Okay. I'm going to give you a little bit of a story and try and explain this as best as I can. When I was in Cornell University, when I went away the second time, I had worked for a company that did investigations that was I think it was upstate. I think it was Spectre. I think it was Spectre and Associates or some firm that dealt with that stuff. Now, at the time when I was away at school, I was at this law firm and I had a private investigation license. Mr. Spectre basically had a problem when he was in not just workers' comp, he was in injury cases. See, Instacart, which I'm not a really big fan of, basically during that time there was contracts with them with Whole Foods. They were doing business with them. And what happened was I kept getting phone calls. Like I had a cell phone, and then I had a landline phone I had at my dormitory where I was, or where the fraternity was. And I basically there was a couple cases recently that I need to bring to people's attention. When you have Instacart, when you're an Instacart driver, when you're a DoorDash driver or you're an Uber Eats driver, you should really keep account to your distance when you're going to these delivery orders. The thing I'm going to bring up is you're really required not to have personal insurance with those. You're really supposed to have business insurance when you do those deliveries. You're actually kind of required to by the state and federal government. You're not really allowed to be using personal insurance because you're using you're paying more, but you're going to get your money back when you go do your taxes. So Mr. Spectre basically brought it to my attention. I remember this story about this, that there are people out there that don't understand how Uber and DoorDash or any of these apps work. So, I'm going to give you a pretty much of a gist of how it was set up. When I was in Cornell University, there was a big thing with college kids and getting food delivery. So there's a company that's called BJ's Shopping Center. There's Costco shopping centers. There's a big, huge store. You could get a lot of bulk items. Now, Instacart does business with both of those companies. But before they did that, they had a company called Whole Foods. Whole Foods wasn't bought out by Amazon yet. It was just at that point, and they lost the contract with Instacart. The reason why I know the history about it is because I was in the background, and some of my friends who built some of those apps like DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever, I was the one who basically designed some of the algorithms. I was responsible from taking the code from a website like you have, like this video, to an app. That was my responsibility. But the problem was that you had people that were pulling scams in those companies. See, this is something I do want to bring to your attention, to Uber and Lyft and any of the people that are drivers. There were hackers that were working at that company that were taking people's information. It wasn't just that company. Zelle, PayPal, Venmo, ID.me, those companies were all involved recently in a criminal investigation by the police department and the FBI. And they didn't tell anybody or the public. So, if you have a delivery and it's 2 miles away, it really should be $20. It shouldn't be, I don't know, $5 or $6 for the delivery. That's how much the cost should be. So what a lot of these companies are doing, they're treating their employees like slavery people or slaves. And that's illegal. And technically speaking, it's not. Those jobs like DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub, even Grubhub, those jobs are really considered you're really considered an employee because they have to go by certain guidelines under Department of Labor. That's something that I learned when I was in law school, and also when I was studying things related to becoming an accountant. They didn't keep record. In other words, these dashers or drivers, they have to be making $20, $30 an hour, and they're not paying you tips. So you could be tipping somebody. Let's just say Susan picks up the order. Susan's not going to get that tip. You know why? Because Amazon pulled a scam. A lot of the drivers that would do Amazon Prime, you would have deliveries and you would pay them to tip. They weren't tipping them. It was going into the employees. It was going into the employee, meaning not the employee, the employer, meaning the company. It was going into the employer's pocket, and that's what a lot of these companies were doing. So, this is just a little bit of a gist. There were workers' comp cases related to that, and I'm going to explain this. I had to testify about that stuff. HEPA filters are required to be in the building. That's a code that has to do with if you have bodily injury harm, it's considered a crime. If you go into the building and they don't have that HEPA filter in the courthouse or the hospital, that is considered bodily injury harm. You're harming a patient, you're harming a customer or a client. It's the same thing with the banks. They're required to have it. Reason why I'm explaining all of this stuff to you guys, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm going to tell you the truth. Yes, I was in the Belmore Fire Department, but I did stuff besides the Belmore Fire Department. The AmeriCorps had me do stuff for the American Red Cross. They had me do stuff for FEMA. FEMA and the EPA are responsible for doing bills that are laws to have these devices to keep people safe. Safety is the number one priority of Department of Health and Department of Labor. And that includes food. That includes washing your hands. I don't know if Instacart or DoorDash has ever explained this. But before you do anything, where you join in or you click those little icon things, you should prioritize the customer's needs and wants. Do they want extra ketchup packages? Do they want mustard packages? Do they want paper, extra paper towels? When you go to Chick-fil-A, how long is the order going to take? Well, these are things you need to keep into account that cost time and money. Well, your identity I'm just going to say this to you. Your identity had gotten stolen when that system was affected. And when I was on the Microsoft Teams and the Google Meet and the Cisco WebEx, all of those systems got affected because when they had those surgeries and these doctors were communicating, or lawyers were communicating, or the judge was communicating in the Zoom meeting in court, or they were communicating via the telephone right here, the telephone. They call in, they say, oh, this is the case of docket case number, DFG345. Well, they would call in. Well, here's the problem. All of these systems got affected because there were hackers out there that stole people's identity. And they were even responsible for your privacy rights. And that's something that I want to bring up. You need to understand the reason why I'm doing this video is to explain this to you. I'm just giving you information. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to tell you. That's 20 plus cases I had where I had to deal with things related to workers' comp. 20. There's a lot more than that. There was just 20 that has to deal with those companies. What do you think the hospitals were like? There were like 40 or 50 of them. I had to testify. There was abuse cases going on or neglect. And that's something that as an EMT, FD&Y people, when you're a paramedic, a CC, or EMT, they had to testify about it. Well, congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to have to eventually go back into a version of workman's comp where I have to explain to a judge nicely, you're going to have a problem in the immediate future because people's identities got stolen. You know the story about Pinterest? I'll give you FYI for your information. Most of that stuff, those people that had that stuff leak from the celebrities, was from the company itself or a customer. And most of those people, they had to identify them. And it's all related to this cybersecurity attack that happened with the Pentagon and everything in and of itself in Washington. And you know what I had to do? I had to testify about it. I was in Supreme Court in Albany. My old boss, Michael Suvero, had me testify about it when I was at Parker Wakeman. So thank you guys. Have a pleasant and wonderful day.